regulations, I think. You know, as Stu said way back before, there were no standards, and there really weren't even curriculums. You'd go to a school district and say, what is your curriculum? And they might have a list of things. You know, like if I teach social studies, it might be westward expansion. That's all, you know, that's what you teach. So there wasn't curriculum. Nobody came in to check to see if you were doing well. You just went to a room, closed the door, and did what you thought you should be doing.
Change is the way schools are financed and controlled. Now, back in the days when we started CLI, just before we started CLI, most of the districts in this country were financed through local taxes. Today, of course, that was considered to be inequitable. And so, virtually throughout the country, all the states took over the finances of the schools. Very few were allowed. I mean, you know, there are still some local taxes, but it's not the primary source of income. And that one change really dramatically caused a lot of differences in the way the schools work, because they're no longer community-based schools. There were schools that were pretty well operated by the states, and then of course as we got into No Child Left Behind, it became more and more and more and more into the federal domain. So who manages the schools, who's responsible for the schools, has changed dramatically over the years.
Well, I think the technology aspect is huge. We didn't have it at all when we started. And what I'm thinking about as Stu was talking, even as we've already changed a lot with technology, it changes so quickly. We don't have a clue what it might be like 25 years from now, or what might be possible. So I know that's definitely going to influence CLI and how CLI works with educators.
Things in Washington, everybody right now is sort of waiting to see what happens. We're in an election year where this interview is taking place, and I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody else knows what's going to happen, but if the Congress gets changed dramatically, if the presidency changes or stays the same, essentially, then we may see some rather interesting events. Now, CLI, what we are going to have to do now, well, we've always had to be flexible. When NCLB came in, we had to be very flexible, because that changed everything. And we had to learn to accept the standards. We had to learn to accept the kinds of assessments that came off the standards. We had to accept the idea that teachers to some degree had to teach toward those assessments. We had to accept all of those things, and sometimes it wasn't a good fit. But we accepted it to the point that we had to, and we got through it. Okay, so that's gone pretty much. So what we have now is Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. And so NCLB is pretty well gone. There's still elements of it left. But now they're saying, okay, the federal government doesn't want to have any of the responsibility for setting up the standards or the assessments. That's all going back to the states. So what we have right now are 50 different states that will have 50 different mechanisms for how to control their schools. And so I don't know what's going to happen in the next 25 years, but I know what we're going to have to do now is that we're going to have to find out what happens in Kentucky, and find out what happens in Illinois, and find out what happens in Wyoming, and we're going to have to make our adjustments to meet every one of those states, particularly those in which we have contracts or want to have contracts, because we're going to have to be able to say to that state, we understand your particular system, and therefore we will try to abide by what you are doing and still be true to our own model. CLI. Period.
Period. Okay.
I was asked that when I retired from the university, and in fact I got up, and well, you both were there at the luncheon, and I think I mentioned the fact that if it hadn't been for CLI, I wouldn't have considered my career to be that much of a success. I mean, I think I did a pretty good job teaching. I think I did a pretty good job as an administrator at the university. I think I did a pretty good job in all those kinds of assignments that I received. But if I hadn't started CLI, I think there would have been a big hole in my career. And if I hadn't been associated with people like Carol and others in the CLI, there would have been a big hole in my life and my career. And it's, you know, you look at, I'm almost 78 years old, so you look back and you say, okay, what was most important besides your family and all that's very important. But in terms of career, I'd just say CLI. If it hadn't been for CLI, I don't think that I would have been anywhere near as content as I am today.
I'm going to say the same thing. It's just, not something, when I first started out teaching, that I ever imagined that I would be doing and working with other schools. I do remember one time Stu mentioned effective methods of teaching, and that was a program that he urged me to develop, and we were working with
Did a great job too.
we were working with community colleges. And we were driving back from Butler County working with theirs, and he turned and looked at me and he said, "Where do you see yourself 5 years from now?" And no one had ever asked me that question, and I was like, I don't know. So I was being kind of flippant, and I said, "Oh, I think I'd like to be a consultant on a national level." And then when CLI came about, and I worked in probably half the states at least, I thought, I guess I'm a consultant at the national level. You know, we've had funny things that have happened, and then we've had crises that have happened. So those are memorable. When we had some lean years that we weren't sure we could still keep going, that was very memorable. But how we worked through it, and everybody held on and became successful again. And then there are lots of funny stories. We really are sorry that we did not write down our travel experiences, because all of the consultants together, we could publish a hilarious book about the kinds of things that happened, but we didn't, and now we're going, remember where were we when that one thing went on? So anyway, can you add to that?
Well, memorable, of course, CLI almost went under in 1995, and you know, I had never written a business plan in my life before CLI. I had never been responsible for using borrowed money to build a business. I had never done any of that sort of thing. Now, I had written doctoral dissertation and done all those kinds of things, but I found out that being a businessman is a whole different kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I realized in 1995 that I could have avoided some of the trauma that we went through had I been a little bit more perceptive of what was going on in the field. I mean, perceptive to the point where I could see where it would head, you know, in terms of our income and our involvement if we didn't do something. I just let things ride because things had been so good for 3 or 4 years, and I thought, well, we got the goose that lays the golden egg, not in terms of money necessarily, but in terms of a lot of involvement with schools. We're doing just great. And that's got to continue. I can't see any reason why it won't continue. But we had a perfect storm hit us, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but changes in policies in the states, changes in policies in the district, changes in policies all over the place, and where we had 5 or 6 contracts all lined up ready to go, we lost all of them. Where we'd have workshops where we used to get 30 or 40 people, we had 3, 4, or 5 sign up.
They were all having financial difficulties.
Everybody was having a problem. And we got caught in the middle of that, and so what I had to do was fire some people, and that wasn't fun. And I had to rethink, and I'll never forget, I called Carol and I said, Carol, we need to talk, and I think that Barbara and Neil need to be involved. And so we went to that steakhouse up there in Topeka, remember that?
I sure do.
And we sat there that night, and we looked at each other, and we ate our steak. I don't think any of us were very hungry, because it was not a good conversation. But it was essentially, okay, what are we going to do now? Because Carol had, by that time, had been so inherently involved in everything that, you know, I couldn't even imagine CLI without Carol. So if Carol could have said, well, I'm just going to go out to get a teaching job, or I'm going to go do something else, she could have said that night. And in fact, I fully expected that she would, but she didn't. She said, I'll hang in there. And I said, I'm going to have to cut your salary in half. She said, I'll hang in there. And even Neil said that. So then, what am I going to do now? I got to keep it secret. So that was memorable to me.
Sure.
Very emotional, as a matter of fact, because I thought it was gone. And Isla did pretty much the same thing. Isla says, whatever it takes, I'm with you. And then it made a change in me because, you know, when you start out in business, particularly if you've never been in it before, you're insecure. And so you feel like you have to make all the decisions. I mean, I'm the guy that's, you know, thousands of dollars in debt. I'm the guy that's responsible for everything. So I'll call the shots. And it was about that time that I decided, well, that's going to be over with. And now we're going to start working together like a family.